What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, July 20th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today, and we're going to get through that. Couple of quick program notes. Charlie Robinson was supposed to be our third-hour guest yesterday. We were not able to get to him because of technical issues that we're dealing with. So he's going to be our third-hour guest today, and, of course, tomorrow in the third hour. Excuse me. Tomorrow in the third hour will be the lovely Lady Claire. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So, I don't know if it's hay fever or what the heck is going on here. Anyway, today's July 20th, which is the anniversary of the landing of Apollo 11 on the moon, and it's also the anniversary of the successful landing of the Viking 1 landers on Mars. Notable holidays for all the space buffs out there. And right now, the big O.J. Simpson's parole. It's all of them still having a credit. He did serve 9 years for conviction. And corporate media, they're focused on it. It's celebrity news. We're going to do celebrity news, and to the exclusion of pretty much anything else of any real value out there. Now, obviously, as we found out late yesterday, John McCain has been diagnosed with a very aggressive type of brain cancer, and unfortunately, the survival rate for people over 55 years old is only about 4%. And hang on a second. Apparently, they've been wondering about McCain's bizarre behavior over the last several weeks, including how confused he seemed to get when he was questioning former FBI Director James Comey at a press conference last month. And where the tumor is located appears to be in the prefrontal lobe, which is where your cognitive abilities are. And it's a nasty way to go. It really is. And it's kind of a little disconcerting. I know there's a lot of reasons we don't like McCain. We don't like his politics. We don't agree with a lot of things that he's done, especially the Forrestal, his attempt to keep the POW issue under wraps. But that's the politics. And I'm a little dismayed at all the people who are out there saying, oh, yes, hurry up and do what you're going to do. And maybe it's because I got to watch my mother die from chemotherapy and radiation. I just can't bring myself to feel good about what has happened to John McCain. And I find it very odd. I'm actually feeling sorry for the guy right now here. So what happens if McCain cannot go back to work in the Senate? Of course, he's out there tweeting, saying he's on his way back and everything. But frankly, given the location and the severity of the tumor and the treatment, I don't think so. So what's going to happen? Well, McCain has had a lock on the Senate for a very long time, and his absence could basically trigger a free-for-all next year. Now, under Arizona law, if McCain has to step down from his seat, the governor must appoint a replacement who has to be from the same party. And that successor would then serve until the next statewide election. The winner of that election would serve out the unexpired term, which ends in 2022. And the way the law is written, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey could actually resign from the governorship and after appointing himself to fill the Senate seat, according to legal experts. So we may see that happen as well. And then, of course, there has to be a new governor for Arizona. All right, let's take a phone call. Mike in Alaska, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mike, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Mike?
I hear you now. I don't know why it's taking so long to get these connections going on. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, our infrastructure is going down, but I'm in touch with you now, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this ADL list, this hit list with all these up-and-coming people, Gavin McInnes, Mike Cernovich, Baked Alaska.
I got to tell you how crushed and disappointed I am that I didn't make the list this time. I was on one of the earlier ADL lists, but I didn't make the varsity this time, so I'm feeling my age.
I'm surprised you didn't make it, Mike, but it's getting to the point now where we can't forget these people that read these things. And then there was one instance a few years back where someone, very similar to what happened at that baseball field, read something they published, some list, and then went on a shooting spree against one of the people they were talking about. So, they have the freedom to put these lists together, but I think we need to push back harder as far as, they get bent out of shape about a CNN GIF where Trump body slams someone at WWE, which we all know is obviously fake. And then they put out these lists and, or put out these stories about where people are playing baseball and then shots are fired. I mean, there's a huge difference.
There very much is, and unfortunately anything the ADL does is never going to be challenged or questioned in the American corporate media, and we can. I understand there's a risk out there of being put on one of these lists because of people who are on the fringe, they're fanatics in support of Israel, and it does represent a certain degree of danger, and it's something obviously Claire and I have had to be aware of over the years. But in general, I think the best reaction is to just make fun of it, to point it being on one of these lists as an object of pride, and it kind of diffuses the situation.
And Mike, if you get a chance, I would like to know more about the origins of that and the SPLC and what is their real stated goal? How much of that actually happened, and then how did that morph into where we are now?
Well, as the name says, the Anti-Defamation League exists to prevent any bad publicity being put out about anybody who's Jewish, and it actually goes back. It was formed right after this very celebrated case involving a girl named Mary Fagan who was killed by the Jewish boss that she worked for. And the case went back and forth, and finally this guy was convicted. Then he was pardoned by the Jewish governor of the state. Then that was followed by a lynching, and at that point the Anti-Defamation League started pulling together and saying we have to control the media so that people can't say bad things about anything that we do. And that is its mission, and it continues to be its mission, to basically attack anybody who's critical of Israel or anything that Israel is doing.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mike. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And I don't know why I'm sneezing all of a sudden. There's a lot of wind and dust in the air, I guess, today. All right. We're going to go back to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dustin?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Mike, I agree with you as the finest gold, 99.99999. But I got to disagree with you on John McCain. He's not your mother, and your mother doesn't arm terrorists. Your mother doesn't arm terrorists to kill men, women, and children, and doesn't think twice about doubling down, tripling down, and shooting down Russian pilots. So
I remember that video where he's up there on the stage dancing around going bomb, 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 bomb Iran. But again, there's a line between disagreeing with what the man does and his politics and celebrating his pain and suffering. That goes over a line, and I'm not comfortable doing it. And I understand other people have different opinions, and you're free to have that opinion under the First Amendment. But I think it sort of brings us down to his level to do that.
I'm not celebrating, Mike. I just don't care if he lives or dies. You know why, Mike? Because if you take one step back, they're going to take 10 forward and crush you. We won't win, Mike. These people don't care. They don't care. Do you actually think the deep state, even if John McCain is or not cares about him, they'll just throw somebody else in there with their ideology? So, we ain't going to win unless we're got to fight back. You know what I mean?
No, I hear what you're saying here. The thing is, McCain has been in the Senate a very long time. He's got the connections. He's got all of that other, political pull, both overt and covert. They can't just put in a McCain light and expect him to be as influential as John McCain has been. And I can imagine right now Israel is in a panic. Because they don't have anybody else in the Senate that was as powerful or as fanatically devoted to Israel as McCain was. They're probably out there trying to find somebody that they can groom, but that grooming process is going to take a little bit of time. Now, one thing I am very glad for and celebrate is that McCain is going to be out of the Senate very, very soon, and that is going to shift the dynamic certainly away from Israel and back more onto the United States.
And Mike, switching gears real quick on something that's more important is Iraq is ordering a whole bunch of advanced T-90 tanks. Now, that's a great thing.
Yeah, it is, and I think Iraq is beginning to understand that there may yet be another conflict with the United States of America, because those tanks are not really appropriate for dealing with dispersed urban guerrilla fighters like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Those tanks are for line-ahead formation, battlefield conflict.
All right, thanks, Mike. Have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Interestingly enough, the tumor that McCain has come down with is the same one that struck Ted Kennedy, and maybe there's just something about the water in Washington, D.C., because it's supposed to be a very, very rare type of brain tumor, and McCain and Ted Kennedy, and I think given their recent performance at the microphone, maybe it's time to get CAT scans for Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters. All right, we're going to do a quick shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just rejoining the network, and we're going to go back to the phones. Fred in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Mike.
Greetings.
How are you doing today? I hope.
Doing okay, except for the
We always have to ask you how you're doing.
I'm doing fine.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm calling about McCain, and for once, I'm disagreeing with Dustin, which makes me question why. I agree with you 100%. We shouldn't celebrate nor, whatever, because there's a lot of people out there, like you said, on our side that are celebrating this, and then it's just like you said. You're putting yourself in his level, and we shouldn't.
No,
I know you were born and raised. I know you're not. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's mostly over on the liberal side where they're all over Twitter and just, absolutely, they're already dancing on his grave and it hasn't even been dug yet.
Yeah, that's just wrong. I mean, I hate the guy. I can't stand him, and I think, I'm sorry to say, but I think this is karma. But I'm not going to be happy about what happens because, the little bit of whatever's left of the Christian in me is that I don't want to be his level. I want to, whatever, live and let live, and that sort of thing. And we shouldn't reach to that level. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, and I appreciate you, Mike.
All right. Well, I appreciate your point of view. And like I said, everybody may have a different point of view on this, and I'm not going to try and impose my reaction to this. And as I said, my reaction to this is coming out of personal experience with my mother, my own recent stay in the hospital, which was not at all pleasant. And again, it is a particularly nasty way to go. So again, I'm surprised at myself. I'm actually feeling sorry for him that he has been struck down in this particularly cruel way. All right, let's take a phone call from. I'm sorry?
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I thought you were gone. What did you want to say?
Sorry, I think it's because Mike, in general, I mean, I've been listening to you for a while. You switched over back and forth and, through the networks and whatnot. And you're just a good person, all in all. I think, it's partially because of your experience, obviously, with your mom and stuff, and I feel bad for you in that case. But in this case, I mean, I think it's just because you have the values of a human being, the humanity, and this and that. Seeing all the stuff that we've seen, it doesn't matter. We don't want to reach to that level. We want to learn from them and try to be better. That's all. That's all I'm trying to say.
No, I agree with you. And there's yet another factor, and that is, of course, the fact that I myself am getting older. And, when you get to be my age and you realize that what life is still left to you is a lot less than you've already been through, and you start thinking about your own mortality, and you start realizing just how precious those last few years can be. And that's another issue. Anyway, Fred, thanks an awful lot.
I don't want to get to that level.
We're going to let you go here, Fred, and switch over to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Do you ever read the New Republic magazine?
Very rarely.
Okay, I very seldom read it also, but there's an issue from August 1st of this year it talks about Donald Trump's relationship with the Russian mafia and also with other crooked politicians in Russia. And what it was basically saying, how the Russians were using Donald Trump's property and his casino to launder money and also to do criminal activities, especially at the Trump Towers.
Well, now I just remembered why I don't read the New Republic. I don't suppose they actually had any evidence.
Well, you should read the article because the writer, he's very thorough, and he mentions names and the dates and everything else.
Okay.
I'm not taking pride. I'm just pointing out something that was written,
yeah,
been talked about, and I think people should just take a look at it and form their own opinion.
Well, something everybody needs to keep in mind and is being basically ignored by the corporate media. Donald Trump has had business relations with Russian interests going way back before this recent adversarial position, back to when Russia and the U.S. were supposed to be buddy-buddy. That is also true for a great number of our politicians and other business leaders all across the country. The corporate media is acting like Donald Trump is the only person with a Russia connection, and that is absolutely simply not true.
I agree with you, but there's no harm in reading an article and forming your own opinion. So, and the final thing, what do you think about Trump's comments toward Sessions? Isn't that kind of bizarre?
Well, not really. As a matter of fact, that was going to be my next talking point here. I think one of the reasons Donald Trump is such a shock to Washington society is he says what's on his mind. He speaks his mind and what's on his mind. So apparently, in an interview with the New York Times, Trump basically said that, looking back on it, he shouldn't have appointed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. He's still very angry over the way that Sessions recused himself, setting the stage for James Comey to leak that information to force the appointment of a special counsel who's on a fishing expedition. Special counsels are supposed to look at just one issue and go for that. It's about Russia. And now Mueller's just all over the place, just digging through Trump's life and that of his family and friends. And even Trump sent back a message saying, your job is supposed to be looking at this Russia-Trump connection. And obviously Mueller is casting the wider net because he's not finding anything. So he's out there on a dirt-digging mission. Now, interestingly enough, Jeff Sessions has issued a statement saying that he will remain as Attorney General as long as that is appropriate. So it looks to me like the back-channel discussion is that Sessions may be fired in the very near future.
I was going to say that, yeah. So, and not only that, though, Donald Trump has the right to fire anyone that he wants to.
That's absolutely right. Of course, the corporate media is going to scream that it's evidence of a cover-up and he's a poor leader because he's firing these people that he appointed and so forth and so on. But Trump needs to clean house. I think Trump is finally starting to understand the profound difference between loyalties in the world of business and loyalties in the world of Washington, D.C. politics. And I think he's finally beginning to understand that he is surrounded by people who are his enemies, people who are out to destroy him, or at the very least are manipulating him to serve their own private agenda. And we know that's true because the CIA went in there and assured Donald Trump 100% that Assad had gassed those people in Idlib, leading Trump to launch that cruise missile attack, which was such a terrible demonstration of the quality of American weapons. And again, the story never really made any sense, and I wish Trump had done a little more thinking about it. But Trump is trusting the head of the CIA, not realizing that the CIA has a long history of lying to presidents.
Well, not only that, though, the head of the CIA is someone that he appointed, though.
I'm sorry?
I'm from Kansas. The head of the CIA is a guy that he appointed, the congressman from Kansas. Donald Trump appointed him.
No, I understand that, but he was being guided in these appointments by some of the people who had gotten into his White House early. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Jim. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as we were mentioning before, the special counsel, Mueller, is expanding his probe in all directions. He's supposed to be looking at ties between the Donald Trump campaign and Russia. Now he's going into all these business transactions, those of his associates. He's just casting a net. It's a fishing expedition is what he's running. And that's not what the special counsel law says. The special counsel is appointed to investigate a single matter. Not just go on off and try and dig dirt, and that's exactly what's going on. Now, Donald Trump has appointed a new candidate to be ambassador to Russia, John Huntsman, and Huntsman has accepted the offer. A lot of people are scratching their head because he's a known war hawk, and he served as governor of Utah, and then he was the U.S. representative in China for 2 years. So during the time that Barack Obama was president, Huntsman was in charge of the U.S. Embassy in China. So he's got the foreign policy chops to do what he's going to be doing. Now, apparently, House Democrats are asking the FBI to probe Ivanka Trump with an eye toward removing her security clearance, claiming that Ivanka engaged in deception by not disclosing all her contacts with foreign officials, in particular the Russians, the evil Russians. This is really turning into a witch hunt. They can't get Trump himself. They're starting to pick off his associates. They're going after his family. We can all see exactly what this is. And Trump he's got to take the initiative. He's been playing rope-a-dope for 6 months now. Totally defensive. He needs to get out the brass knuckles. Start busting some heads and say, look, you work for me. You don't work for Sheldon Adelson. You don't work for Bibi Netanyahu. You don't work for Hillary Clinton. You work for me. And if you don't like that, you're free to resign right now. Now, over at the Department of Justice, the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein has finally broken his silence and came on out and said former Director James Comey broke FBI policy when he leaked the memos to the press. So Comey was just playing fast and loose with the law. And of course, his job is to protect Hillary, actually to protect the narcocracy at any expense. And again, we're starting to see just how incredibly corrupt and rotted that swamp is that Donald Trump is trying to deal with. And the swamp thing is rising up trying to fight back. Now, there is another story that is coming on out here that James Comey, when he got his copy of that dossier about Trump and the prostitutes in Moscow, apparently he went and showed it to Donald Trump and said, I will keep this under wraps, but you're going to have to give me some favors. And Trump looked at the dossier, realized it was just a complete fiction, and told Comey to basically take a hike. And it was at that point that it was leaked out to the media, Trump trying to blackmail the president. And again, not the first time it's happened. J. Edgar Hoover was notorious for his secret private files on the top politicians, and he blackmailed members of Congress. He even blackmailed President John F. Kennedy. And Comey tried to do that to Trump, and Trump wasn't having any of it because Trump knew the story was completely bogus. Now, an interesting development is starting to happen. It is appearing that former head of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, is starting to cooperate with the Capitol Police regarding blocking access to a computer seized from her as part of a criminal cybersecurity investigation. Now, apparently, when this all has to do with these IT people in the Capitol building who were caught hacking into members of Congress accounts, and one of them was Schultz's top IT advisor. And the police grabbed his laptop, and she literally threatened them not to open it and not to use it. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So here's where we are. We're talking about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was up to her neck in the rigging of the primaries last year to throw the nomination to Hillary Clinton. And shortly after she was forced to resign as the head of the Democratic National Committee in the wake of the leaked DNC emails, Schultz's top information technology aide, Pakistan-born Imran Awan, was named as the lead suspect in that information breach involving the House of Representatives. And instead of cooperating with the Capitol Police, Debbie Wasserman Schultz used a hearing on the law enforcement group's budget to threaten consequences for Police Chief Matthew R. Verderosa unless he gave her back the laptop or at least assured her that it would not be looked at. And apparently during the televised hearings, you could see she was sweating over this issue. There's clearly something on the laptop that was very damaging. Well, that was then, and this is now. And apparently Debbie Wasserman Schultz is now negotiating with the Capitol Police, and she is now saying it's okay for the police to look at the laptop. So she may be cutting a deal. She may be about to turn on the DNC machine. Probably a lot of those insiders have been holding tight and staying silent in the hope that Trump was going to be kicked out of the White House and somehow Hillary Clinton returned to power. It's not happening. And sooner or later, somebody's going to say, I need to get out of here before I wind up in Fort Marcy Park. And it's going to be the bird on the wire effect. One will go, and then everybody's going to realize the political climate has shifted away from Hillary Clinton, and there's going to be prosecutions, and there's going to be a rush for everybody who wants to make a deal. And the sooner they go in there, the better the deal they're going to make. And the last one to try and make a deal is not going to get a deal at all, and they all know it. Now, this manufactured meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians, the lawyer involved, Natalia Veselnitskaya, is now saying she was also duped into this meeting by this lobbyist who was pushing for the repeal of the Magnitsky Act, a guy from London, Bill Browder, and she now wants to testify before Congress as well as to what went on, because she's feeling like she was set up and used. Now, there's a very interesting article that came on out over at Russia Today. And they're asking, will Trump survive? And at this point, it is still very much up in the air, which is why I think he needs to go on the offensive. He needs to regain the initiative. But this article points out a very important factor in that we are accepting the legitimization of the destructive means employed against the President of the United States of America. And it's setting a very dangerous precedent that will have lasting damage for the nation. And every president who gets elected from now on, if this is allowed to continue, will have the same thing happen. The losing party and the losing candidate will just go on the warpath to try and retroactively tear him down and make it impossible for him or her to do their job. We are seeing a government that has become dysfunctional because of all the faction fighting going on. Now, there's a lady named Linda Sarsour. She's a feminazi. She's promoting Sharia law. And apparently, during an upset of an interview with CNN anchor Jake Tapper, basically she called him a white supremacist. So they resort to name calling, and you know they're losing it, and it's really looking bad over in the corporate media here, and it looks even worse over at the New York Slimes, because the New York Times' Tim Arango basically wrote an article looking back at the war in Iraq and decrying Iran's increased role in Iraq. And he basically wrote a revisionist history of American and Saudi involvement in the Middle East. And Arango is painting the U.S. as a noble, freedom-loving nation on a mission to improve the lives of average Iraqis, and Iran as a sinister imperial force working to expand its sphere of influence across the region. And you read that, and it's almost impossible not to laugh at the absurdity of it. Because we know who the sinister imperial force is trying to spread their sphere of influence. And it makes common sense that the Iraqis are going to be doing business with Iran. They share a common border. And after years of having bombs dropped on them by the United States, why would anybody in Iraq buy a U.S.-made product? But the New York Slimes is out there trying to rewrite the history that we're the good guys. We're bringing democracy to the rest of the world. And the reality is the United States has engaged in all these interventions since the end of World War II, always under the banner of we're bringing democracy to those people, and it never happens. What they get is a puppet ruler and sham elections. The Shah of Iran, Pinochet in Chile. Okay, let's take a phone call from Steve in Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to ask about John McCain. Under the circumstances, like having a brain tumor, basically, I mean, there's been indications lately he hasn't been right.
Yes.
I mean, in his position, can the federal government step in to control his position, or kind of look at his records and stuff like that, or is that like a states' rights thing where Arizona could get in, like people from Arizona, somebody, or how does that work? I mean, if he's incapacitated completely from doing his job, who would step in and fill his shoes and have access to his information?
Well, back when senators were actually chosen by the state governments, the state government had the right to recall a senator at any time. Following a constitutional amendment where the senators became an elected position, the state governments lost that authority. But senators can be impeached for a variety of reasons, and it need not necessarily be criminal. Incompetence could be there. I mean, the 25th Amendment was written specifically for the president, but there are other legal precedents for saying this member of Congress cannot function and needs to step down. And it probably would be done very quietly and behind closed doors to convince him that it is time for him to step down. When he does step down, the governor of Arizona will appoint a replacement from the same party. And the speculation is that the governor of Arizona is actually going to appoint himself the new senator from Arizona. Yeah, no,
really?
Yeah, Arizona law allows that. And so what the governor would do was probably strike a deal with his lieutenant governor and say, okay, I'm going to step down. You're going to be the new boss on the condition that you send me to the U.S. Senate. They'd have to do it in that order.
What do you know about this guy from Arizona? Is he on the right side of things, or is he a scumball like McCain?
Well, I would have to say the assumption on the latter one is no, because McCain's worked all his life at that. But I think the governor of Arizona, I think, is very much on the right side, certainly with regard to the immigration issue. Because the governor was definitely out there trying to say Arizona has a right to secure its southern border. And, of course, when Obama was in office, Obama came back and said, no, you cannot do that. I don't know enough about the current governor of Arizona, but obviously it would be timely to start looking at who he is and what his policies are, because it does seem very likely that he will arrange for himself to become McCain's replacement.
Has there been any talk on mainstream media about this potential situation? I haven't been able to follow it, but is there, like, are they talking about McCain having to, well, I mean, they're saying he could die shortly, so, I mean, obviously he's going to have to step away. Are they discussing it all, or are they avoiding it, or are you hearing anything out there?
On the big corporate media, they're basically parroting the official line from McCain's office, which is that he will be back in the Senate as soon as possible. But the type of brain tumor that he has, the 5-year survival rate for people his age is only about 4%. And first of all, in removing that tumor, they've had to remove a lot of functioning brain with it. Then they're going to hit that area with radiation, and I don't see him really being able to come back and do his job.
Well, he wasn't. I mean, the recent hearings where it was laughable, like he could barely speak. The recent Senate hearings that were going on into the Russia investigation and stuff. I mean, he was definitely not himself. I mean, I don't know how to say it, but he was definitely not comprehensible. It was almost, people were snickering as he was talking. There's something affecting his ability to function properly. So I would imagine that the governor would probably want to force the issue on this under these circumstances. Don't you think?
I'm sure the governor may be one of the chorus of voices saying it's time for McCain to resign. But if McCain refuses to go, it's going to be up to his fellow senators and Congress to try and force the issue.
Oh, really? Okay. So there would have to be a vote or something, potentially?
I think that would be very embarrassing for it to go to the floor. I think they're going to try and put pressure on him to step down behind closed doors in the interest of retaining his personal dignity and his historical image, blah, 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 blah.
Now, does the governor, like, once this happens, who would have first access to his office and his files? Because I would imagine there's a shredder truck pulling up to the side of his building any day now.
I would agree with you. Obviously, whoever replaces him in office gets access to McCain's official files and information, but anything that McCain has in the way of private files, such as in his home and anything, that becomes part of McCain's estate.
Even if they're on government letterhead? Or
Well, I don't think he's going to use government letterhead for his personal files for that very reason. He doesn't want to make them an official document.
I get you. Okay. All righty. I just wanted to get your input on that. I appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the corporate media, and we mentioned this yesterday, but over at the Washington Compost, they're responding to that tragic shooting in Minneapolis by talking about the backlash against Somalis and what a bad thing this is for the open borders and immigration and the refugees, because everyone's going to be judging Somalis on the basis of this officer. And seems to be very little sympathy for the victim of this. And again, I don't think his being Somali had a thing to do with it. And everywhere I've gone to try and find out if this officer Noor was on prescription antidepressants, there's nothing there, one way or the other. It's all been clamped down on. All righty. Now, kind of an interesting transition may be about to take place over in Syria. Earlier today, Donald Trump went down to the Pentagon with the Secretary of Defense to meet with the Joint Chiefs to talk about cleaning up ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria once and for all. And at the same time, Donald Trump pulled the plug on that covert CIA program to arm the moderate Syrian rebels, which doesn't mean the CIA is going to stop. They may have their own agenda. But I suggested a possibility not too long ago that the U.S. government may realize they're just not going to be able to prevail in Syria with Russia continuing to support the Assad government. And so what the U.S. is going to do is they're going to go on in and they're going to kill their own military proxies on the ground, ISIS and al-Qaeda, then declare victory and go home, even though strategically, in the larger context of that plan that Wesley Clark leaked back in 2005, this represents a major geopolitical defeat for the United States of America. But it looks to me like they may be getting ready to do just that. Now, you probably are familiar with this Twitter account that's supposed to be this 7-year-old girl in Syria just putting out all these stories about Assad's brutality and the Syrian government's crimes against humanity. And there was Syria Danny, Gay Girl in Damascus, Little Omran, and one by one they've all been exposed as manufactured propaganda fronts. And one of the most recent ones was this supposedly 7-year-old girl, Bana al-Abed, and her Twitter feed has been used and cited by the corporate media as the symbol of the evil Assad government. And that one has now also been outed. The sophistication of the language in the tweets is way beyond a 7-year-old. And analysts are looking at the tweets and saying, there's more than one person posting. It's another fraud. It's another hoax. You know the motto of the United States government. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. Over in Iran, they are basically reacting to the new sanctions imposed on Iran by Donald Trump in response to Iran's missile development program, which was never part of the P5+1 deal. And basically, Iran is in compliance with the P5+1, and the U.S. is not, and they're still out there continuing to provoke. And we saw the same thing in Syria. When Putin came up with a deal for Syria to surrender its chemical weapons, Syria surrendered the chemical weapons, but that did not stop the U.S. from its continuing aggressions in Syria to oust Assad. And this is one of the reasons why other countries around the world do not feel they can trust the United States government. Now, article coming out of Press TV, the U.S. is seeing Iran's sensible policies as a threat to their own continued meddling in the Middle East. And that's why, one of the reasons, that they're after Iran. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, there's another point of view regarding Iran. This is coming out of Press TV. And the gist of the article is basically that the United States government is starting to recognize they are losing influence in the Middle East. Those countries aren't willing to do what the U.S. says. They're starting to turn away. They're starting to pivot toward Russia and China. And that the United States' focus on punishing Iran is a show of force to try and retain control over the rest of the Middle East. Meanwhile, Iran is saying they're going to retaliate against the new U.S. sanctions, which they do not feel are justified. And they might withdraw from the nuclear deal. And this is a mistake. Rouhani is walking into a trap. Remember, earlier in the week, Trump was going to pull out of the deal, which would have made the U.S. look like the bad guy. But instead, Trump recertified the P5+1 deal, then started piling sanctions and other provocations onto Iran to force them to pull out of the deal, making Iran seem like the bad guy in all this. That's what's going on here. And again, the United States has not complied with their half of the P5+1 deal. Iranian money is still frozen in the United States. The sanctions from before the P5+1 are still in place. Now, the Pentagon is still very angry because Turkey disclosed U.S. bases in Syria, many of which were not known to the public. And basically, this is Turkey poking the U.S. in the eye as those tensions increase. And the Pentagon is out there saying, well, this puts our forces under unnecessary risk in Syria. Well, actually, sending those forces into Syria without the permission of the Syrian government is what's putting them at unnecessary risk. If you're all that worried about our forces in Syria, bring them home. They'll be safe here in the United States, more or less. There's been another coalition airstrike in Yemen, killing yet more children. This according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. And the bloodshed just continues. And as a marker about that, over in Iraq, the Battle of Mosul is pretty much over. And they're starting to count up the dead. And the current estimate is 40,000 civilians are feared dead in this conflict over the city, to take it back from ISIS. And ISIS would not have been there in the first place, except that it was a creation of the United States in order to further their foreign policy in the region. Now, one of our callers mentioned this earlier in the show. Iraq is going to buy a bunch of advanced Russian T-90 tanks. And the T-90s will reinforce the Iraqis' M1A1 Abrams fleet that apparently has been damaged in the fight against the Islamists. Okay, there's the music. We're going to do a quick station break. Back with hour number 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I've been talking about the poor quality of America's military weapons, the high cost. And Russia has been using the conflict in Syria as a real-world combat demonstration of their military hardware. And as word continues to go out about the problems with the F-22 and the F-35, it is not surprising to see other nations start to turn away from U.S. military defense contractors and approach Russia to buy their air forces at all these international air shows around the world. And right now, apparently, military aviation counts for over 50% of Russia's arms exports to the rest of the world. They can't make those things fast enough. Now, getting on back to this diplomatic impasse over the diplomatic properties, there's an article in Russia Today basically saying that Donald Trump is basically trapped by the straitjacket of Russophobia, and that's what prevented him from returning the seized Russian property. And the problem is the only anti-Russia hysteria is in the war hawks in the government and the corporate media, because ordinary people on the streets, they don't think this is important. They've heard it too much. They don't think there's anything there at all. And they're absolutely right. This is just more Saddam's nuclear weapons nonsense. Article out of Russia Today again. Great Britain's main growth industry seems to be brutalizing the world's poorest with high-tech military equipment. And it's talking about Britain's investing in these F-35 fighter jets without a clear idea of how much it's really going to cost. They know what the initial aircraft will cost, but they know they're buying an aircraft that's going to require all kinds of patches and upgrades and new equipment to deal with all the problems that the plane is known to have. And already the British government is out there saying, we need to know where we're going. We need to know where the bottom is on all of this. Now, China is moving a large amount of military hardware into Tibet after this Sikkim standoff, and it's starting to look like that's another potential flashpoint and what may be going on. The U.S. does have a mutual defense pact or cooperation treaty with India, and maybe the thinking is that if they couldn't get into a war with China over North Korea, because China basically came down against North Korea, that they could get a war with China going in India, and that would be a really good place to fight it on out. I'm sure that India's government would be glad to thin out their domestic population a little bit. They're very crowded over there. But the Chinese army has moved tens of thousands of tons of military hardware into that remote, mountainous Tibet region. And you kind of have to wonder exactly why. There isn't much there. The terrain is very difficult. There's not a lot of mineral resources. You're basically in the Himalayas where everything's ground up by the tectonic action. So there are no large contiguous deposits of any kinds of minerals that anybody really wants. Meanwhile, over in the Koreas, President Moon Jae-in is moving forward with this attempt to try and settle things down. And he's talking about a treaty that would start bringing the two Koreas together and demilitarizing and calling for the removal of North Korea's nuclear weapons by the year 2020. And if the deal is signed, it will be an incredible achievement after decades of tension between the two states. Now, over in Israel, the violence around the Temple Mount is continuing, and apparently there's a video that came on out. Israeli police using stun grenades to disperse Palestinian worshippers. Another video where an officer punched a Muslim worshiper in the face. And this is a flashpoint situation. This could be, in fact, a deliberate provocation. Benjamin Netanyahu is in a lot of trouble politically. He's facing corruption charges. So what do you do when you're facing a possible criminal prosecution? Oh, you start a ruckus somewhere else. Remember when Monica Lewinsky testified before Congress about the blue dress, which itself was a distraction away from government-sanctioned drug running in Bill Clinton's Arkansas? And she walks out of the hearing room expecting a phalanx of reporters, and all she sees are empty steps because Bill Clinton had taken that moment to launch cruise missile attacks against a supposed biological weapons laboratory in the Sudan, which turned out to be an ordinary pharmaceutical compounding laboratory. It was an aspirin factory. And so you, the taxpayers, got to pay for the million-a-pop cruise missiles, and you got to pay to rebuild that factory, because the factory owners successfully sued the United States government for the destruction of their business. So the same thing may be going on over there in Jerusalem. Netanyahu needs a media distraction to take public focus off his corruption trial. And over at Desert Peace, they have an article saying that Netanyahu is playing with fire on the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. And I think it's intentional on his part. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Here in the United States of America, members of Congress are pushing for a bill that would criminally outlaw support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel. And it is a nasty one. It carries a prison sentence of up to 20 years. Now, at some point, somebody's going to have to take this to a Supreme Court challenge under the First Amendment, because boycotts are considered a peaceful form of protest, and protest is protected by the First Amendment. But our members of Congress, who are actually here working on behalf of Israel, don't seem to remember that. Maybe they all need brain scans. We need to go back and look at that issue of all the missing trillions from the U.S. Department of Defense. Right now, the known total of unaccountable spending by the Pentagon is $6.5 trillion with a T. That works out to $65,000 for every United States family. $65,000. And somebody ought to say, we need to find that money. Where did it go? Now remember, the day before 9/11, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld held a press conference and said, yeah, we've lost another $3.5 trillion. Should have been the defense and economic scandal of the year. But fortunately for Donald Rumsfeld, one day later was 9/11, and the corporate media promptly forgot about all the missing money, your money, from the Department of Defense. And interestingly enough, that airplane that crashed into the Pentagon, instead of flying straight on in and hitting the Pentagon, it flew around the Pentagon and came on in, and it plowed into the offices of the auditors who were trying to find where that money went. So whoever got that money got off with it absolute scot-free. Now, over at NBC, they've had a survey, and 76% of Americans are afraid there's going to be a major war. That's 10% up from just last February. So Americans are very concerned about our war-happy government, and I'm concerned because I think the United States is not going to be able to prevail in a conventional war against Russia and China. I don't think the United States is going to prevail even if the combat goes nuclear. Of course, if it goes nuclear, nobody's going to win, except the bankers. They're going to be lined up there and say, oh yeah, we got loans for you to rebuild all that was destroyed. Got plenty of loans here. Now, you're probably familiar with one of the major corporate media conglomerates called iHeartMedia. They own a huge number of radio stations all across the country. We have one here in Hawaii, and one of their producers is actually a neighbor. But apparently they're in serious financial trouble. They're losing listenership, they're losing advertisers, and iHeartMedia is in discussions with the bondholders, desperately trying to avoid going into bankruptcy. Now, Australia is exporting a record amount of gold to China, which signals that China is moving forward on its plan of partially backing the yuan with gold. And that would make the yuan look very attractive to other nations compared to the U.S. dollar, which is, if you think about it, backed with the future slave labor of the American people. And the problem is there aren't enough Americans, even with all the refugees and illegal immigrants, even if we had jobs for all of them, to ever redeem all those treasury bonds that have been put on out to float this economy. And financial people understand this. And so to them, the U.S. dollar is not a trustworthy store of value at this point. The ruble is looking attractive. The yuan's looking attractive. Russia and China are now settling their accounts between the two countries in gold. The private central bankers are crying, throwing tantrums. And I agree with that Pentagon assessment. The United States of America is an empire that is clearly in decline. Apparently, Sears, as it struggles to continue to exist, is going to be closing more and more of their brick and mortar stores. They're going to start selling their products, especially appliances, through Amazon. Amazon is going to start carrying Sears appliances, for those of you who need a new dishwasher or whatever. Walmart has now replaced more than 4,000 of their employees with machines. That's 4,000 people who are not going to have the money to go back into Walmart and buy anything. Harley-Davidson spirals down. They're announcing U.S. layoffs. They are building a new motorcycle factory over in Thailand for two reasons. Labor is cheaper there. Government interference is less there. And Asia is the up-and-coming market for their product. Americans aren't buying a lot of motorcycles, just like they're not able to buy new cars. CSX, the railroad company, the shipping company, is getting ready to lay off an additional 700 people. And that tells us that the transport of raw material and finished goods in this country is continuing to slow down. It's all grinding to a halt. Now, over in the world of the student loan bubble, it's again, higher education used to be about higher education and better paying jobs, preparing people to be a contributing part of our society. It's been turned into another racket. Lure them into college with promises of high-paying jobs, or at least the fashion statement, I have a college degree. Plump them on that barbed debt hook and keep them there for the rest of their lives. And we're already starting to see a decline in enrollment in colleges because young people are looking at these college graduates coming on out, and they're not able to find a decent job. Boy, that's a shame you're not working. You've got a college degree, right? I have a degree in gender studies. What kind of a job can you get with that? I have no idea. How many art history majors can an economy absorb? We could actually start seeing colleges and universities failing. Over in Europe, the EU has issued an ultimatum to Poland. If Poland continues to try and institute their own reforms, clashing with the EU rules, in particular the area of refugees, the EU is threatening to strip Poland of their voting rights at the European Union Council, which is kind of an empty threat because the European Parliament doesn't really have any authority. All the real decisions are made by the European Union Commission. The European Union Parliament is more for show than anything else. They can advise. They can have a vote and say this is the sense of the Parliament and the members of the EU state, but the European Union Commission isn't bound to that. Now, Merkel apparently has had enough with what's going on over in Turkey. As you know, they've been trying to talk to Turkey about coming into the EU. And Turkey is all of a sudden getting very hostile. They look like they're pivoting toward Russia. And Germany is now threatening to suspend their payments to the European Union until they sort out what's really going on with Turkey. And, of course, that is a very real and tangible threat, because with Great Britain pulling out of the European Union, Germany is going to be carrying the brunt of propping up all those other EU nations. And the German people are pretty much sick and tired of that, over and above all the anger and frustration from the refugee problem. Austria is now threatening to send their army to their border with Italy in the next 24 hours over this migrant issue. They're basically saying if Italy continues to send their refugees into Austria, Austria is going to close their border militarily. We're beginning to see the end of the European Union. And I'm sure out there in the wilderness, George Soros is screaming, no, no, this is not what I wanted. This is not what I spent all my billions on. A little bit of good news. The United States Supreme Court has ruled on the latest challenge of the travel ban. And the Supreme Court tells our own local Hawaii judge, Derek Watson, to go jump in the volcano, and says Trump can enforce his travel ban. And Judge Watson had issued a court order saying that the travel ban cannot be enforced unless it includes grandparents as bona fide relatives exempt from the travel ban. And I understand with our local culture, extended families, the kapuna, and everything, I can see where he's coming from. But the travel ban is the travel ban is the travel ban. And we've got to stop all this infighting, because it's sending a message to the rest of the world that our nation, it's not cohesive. It's not going in the same direction. It's fragmenting. And that does make us look weak. Now, over in London, as you know, the scandal over the Grenfell Tower fire has continued to grow. And it's reached the point where residents and protesters are demanding the entire cabinet of the local council resign. The protesters are calling these officials murderers, saying they have blood on their hands after the deadly fire because of decisions they made to save a little tiny bit of money while exposing these residents of these towers to dangerous toxic substances. Now, here's a good example of the mindset of a government. Up in Toronto, there was this community park, and there was this rise halfway through it, and it needed a set of stairs. And the city council was going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they basically had an estimate of $65,000 to build this little tiny set of stairs. And they're going back and forth on it. And finally, a local resident just got fed up with it. And he went out over to the park and he built a set of stairs. Total cost $550. And the city is now threatening to tear it down because it wasn't built to their standards. They wanted to spend the $65,000 on it. I wonder whose Nepet was going to get that contract. That's an example of just how wasteful government is. They wanted to spend $65,000 on this small flight of stairs. It's not even a full story. It's like maybe 7-8 steps. Citizen built it for $550. Now, down in Brazil, the court has ordered the seizure of ex-President Lula's assets. They're going to be frozen and sold off to try and pay off the costs and losses of some of his crimes. And his assets include 3 apartments, a plot of land, 2 vehicles, and 2 bank accounts with more than the equivalent of $190,000 in there. Boy, I would like to see that sort of thing happen here, where politicians are actually convicted of corruption and they're stripped of their wealth. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, the U.S. Army, in an effort to compete with more technologically advanced forces, and there's a very telling admission there, is going to modernize the U.S. military with more autonomous drones and Internet of Things devices. which sounds kind of nice until you recall just how vulnerable the Internet of Things has turned out to be. For example, millions of Internet of Things devices have now been hit by what's called the Devil's Ivy bug in an open source code library. There's open source code for the Internet of Things, and people are using it, and it turned out that there was an unpatched weakness in there. And the military has not always had a lot of luck with their computers. I remember there was this test where they had this entire warship wired up to be run by computers on a LAN using Windows NT. And they took it out for sea trials, and the whole system crashed. It had to be towed back to the dock. Now, if you have an iPhone, you should get the latest update. It patches a number of vulnerabilities, and they're saying this is a very, very serious bug they discovered that could enable remote code execution on the device. So if you have an iPhone, go ahead and update it, and I already did mine as well here. Apparently, there's another warning regarding the WhatsApp. There is a new virus that secretly videos you and shares your entire web history. It's called Ghost Control. And it creates a backdoor into the device that allows cyber criminals to siphon the data, including your call logs, text messages, contact details, phone numbers, GPS location data, and the entire history in your web browser. And again, where's the NSA in all this? Or are these cyber criminals simply finding the backdoors the NSA ordered put into these devices? Ethereum has been hit yet again. Third highest in 20 days. They got $32 million. So that's not looking very good at all. Now, do you remember back when Volkswagen was caught using rigged software in their cars to cheat the vehicle emissions tests? The software was written to detect when the car was really being driven versus when it was sitting there on a test stand. And it would change the engine parameters when it determined it was on a test stand to get the correct numbers on the vehicle emissions test. When it determined you were really driving the car, it would reconfigure the engine to get you that pep and zip and power that the drivers really wanted. And Volkswagen has been making payouts on it. And now it has reached $1.3 billion. And California's Air Resources Board is basically saying VW will pay another $154 million in penalties and costs. And this is coming out of Volkswagen Group of America, and obviously Volkswagen is planning on recovering that money. Part of it will come off their taxes as a business loss and dump that load onto you. And the rest will be increased prices on the cars, which isn't going to make them attractive for people to buy. And nobody's got money to buy cars. Claire and I keep looking at these commercials and saying, wow, if we actually had money, now would be the time to buy a car. As I said before, we have this old abandoned drive-in movie theater at the bottom of the hill. It used to be used for a flea market. Now it's being rented out as an overflow parking lot for car dealerships. And you drive by there and there's just all these row on row of matching motor vehicles behind chain link and barbed wire. The automotive dealers are trying to get rid of the 2017s because the 2018s are coming out now. In fact, those could be 2018s sitting down there now. But if somebody does not figure out a way to get money back into the hands of ordinary consumers as decent wages and salaries in exchange for their labor and skill, this economy is going to continue to slow down until it locks up. It is now inevitable. And, okay, let's look at that one here. Apparently a nationwide outage hit Bank of America customers yesterday. Don't know if it's been resolved yet, but apparently it kept people from being able to access their accounts. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We have a phone call waiting on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call. Jim in Kansas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
At the beginning of your show, you mentioned this date and items that occurred on that day, on this day, and I remember it was this date, but I don't remember which year it was that I was listening to Chuck Harder, and he was talking about this guy who was a buddy of Clinton, who they found dead in a park.
Yeah,
You could
I forgot to mention that because I was more into the space stuff. But I think you're absolutely right here.
I'll get off the line and let you talk about Vince, okay?
All right. Well, obviously, bye-bye. Obviously, let's see, back here, and, okay, it was July 20th. I completely forgot about it. Yes, today's the anniversary of the day they found Vince Foster's body dumped in Fort Marcy Park and declared it to be a suicide. Even though there were all kinds of problems with the story. They tried to plant a bogus gun on him. The FBI literally manufactured the identification of the gun by Vince's wife, Lisa. She identified a silver-colored gun, and the gun found with the body was black. It was another cover-up, was another murder, another arcanicide. And again, this was the story that basically ended my career in Hollywood. And all I did was ask a question. This doesn't make any sense because it all began with a photo leaked by the White House to Reuters and broadcast all over the place showing Vince Foster's hand, supposedly with the gun that he had killed himself with. And there wasn't a speck of blood visible anywhere. And if you've ever looked at a photo of a real suicide by gunshot to the mouth, there's blood everywhere. And there were some other problems with the photo as well. And all I did was ask a question. And the next thing I knew, I was blacklisted in Hollywood. And now we're finding out it was happening to all kinds of people. It was hardly alone. It was a huge number of people just asking questions. And the FBI came on in and basically destroyed our careers. All righty, getting on back to the present site here. The FCC is now saying there is no documented analysis of the cyber attack it claims crippled their website last May. And I'm wondering why there wasn't an analysis, or if maybe the FCC just had a poorly designed website like Obamacare and doesn't want to admit it here. Now, there's an organization called Nurses Against Mandatory Vaccines, and it is a movement that is trying to create awareness of the current oppressive vaccine stance that hospitals and government are taking. You will buy this stuff. You will stick it in your arms and the arms of your children. And there are 22,000 nurses who are part of this organization who are refusing mandatory vaccinations. And the big issue they have is the flu vaccine. And they're saying this is an infringement of their constitutional rights. And certainly, if there is such a thing as an inalienable right, it is a right to decide what goes into your body and what does not. And the flu vaccine's value has been called into question many times. Even the CDC admits it sometimes doesn't work. Some nurses are feeling so strongly about this, they're willing to give up their jobs. It reminds me of a quote from Thomas Jefferson. If the people let government decide what foods they eat and what medicines they take, their bodies will soon be in as sorry a state as are the souls of those who live under tyranny. And that's absolutely right. Because when the government tells you what food you're going to eat and what medicines you're going to take, it's not for your benefit. It's for the benefit of the crony corporations who are big donors and supporters of the status quo. Look how many bad and dangerous products are being forced on us just because they make money. And to show you just how bizarre this really has become, let's look at what's going on in California. Okay? Out in California, they have a new law that says kids cannot attend public schools unless they have had the mandatory vaccines. Meanwhile, the same California government is now working on legislation to prohibit enforcement of laws against illegal aliens who commit crimes. Does that make any kind of sense at all? Now, Sweden, which is as liberal as it gets, has surprised a lot of people because they are now banning mandatory vaccinations over serious health concerns. So just think about that for a minute. Sweden, which is so liberal, even Jeremy Clarkson couldn't resist making fun of them, is out there saying, yes, there are serious health concerns. And they're banning mandatory vaccinations. It should be up to you. If you want the vaccine, fine. If you don't, fine. Now, here's where it gets really weird. Okay, this is an article out of Government Slaves. The American Diabetes Association had an article, 22 foods to avoid with diabetes, and warns diabetics about consuming things like milkshakes, processed lunch meat, frozen pizzas, biscuits with sausage gravy, and they offer an alternative menu, including lunch meats, pork sandwiches, bacon, ice cream sundaes, and grilled chicken sausage. In other words, the American Diabetes Association is pushing recipes containing ingredients that promote diabetes, along with cancer, heart disease, chronic inflammation, dehydration, hypertension, irritable bowels, and migraine headaches. See, the American medical industrial complex does not want you to really be healthy, because then they lose money. They need the American people to be chronically sick. They need the American people on that treadmill of prescription medication. That's why they're fighting against legalizing marijuana, because the non-psychoactive part of marijuana is good for a lot of common ailments. They don't want you to be able to grow your own medicine. They don't want you to treat yourself. They want to make money off of you, and the sicker you are, the more they make. Same thing with food additives that make you eat more. They'll load up the food with monosodium glutamate, which interferes with the signal to the brain that you've eaten enough, so you'll eat more. And that means you buy more, and the food companies make more money. And in the meanwhile, we have this American obesity crisis, which is then used to try and sell you exercise machines and other products. Money, 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 money. Now, article coming out of Real Climate Science. The Greenland ice sheet is gaining near record amounts of ice this year. And as summer is starting to wind down, it's been determined that there's been very little melting of the Arctic ice cap this year. In fact, they're calling it the year without an Arctic summer. Meanwhile, there's yet another research team debunking global warming, saying it is inconsistent with the temperature data. Basically, fear is a business model that has made Al Gore rich, along with all of his other Carbonazi cronies. And according to this latest report, they're basically saying they analyzed the global average surface temperature data produced by NASA, NOAA, and Hadley Climate Research Unit. Remember, Hadley was caught up in that ClimateGate leak that showed they were writing the computer software to rig the results. So scientists and researchers from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, MIT, and several leading universities basically showed the GAST data is completely bunk. The warming it shows is all the result of adjustments to the raw temperature data, and the raw temperature data does not show any warming whatsoever. They're just rigging it. And, of course, Al Gore is out there with his latest propaganda movie, An Inconvenient Sequel, and it's filled with small children who are saying, oh, I'm so terribly afraid the world will be destroyed before I can grow up. And just pathos instead of science here. So here we have the propaganda out here, the Daily Mail out there saying last month was the third warmest June in history, putting 2017 on track to be one of the hottest years ever recorded. Well, actually, no, because right now the maximum temperatures across the United States for example, today, are 6 degrees 6 degrees cooler rather, than this same day in 1934. 6 degrees. 1934 was 6 degrees hotter than it is today. Another article coming out of Real Climate Science saying that, yes, the temperatures are in fact going down when looking at the historical record. And all the global warming articles, when they try and show a warming trend, they clip the data. They don't show you the earlier period where it was warmer. Remember when that global warming scandal first surfaced, and it came on out that people who were profiting from the global warming fear campaign had gone into WikiLeaks and edited the articles on the Roman and medieval warming periods to flatten out the data and make it look like it wasn't really that big a deal. Another article, this one from IceAgeNow.info. Solar activity is in decline. It's not only in decline, it's a very fast decline. In fact, it's looking like we're in the period of the fastest decline in solar activity in 9,000 years. There's some serious stuff going on out there. Now, do you remember when the Al Gore and the carbon Nazis were out there with their polar bear warnings? Oh, the polar bears are going to drown when the ice melts. Actually, polar bears can swim. Polar bears don't even have to swim. They can float. That white fur is hollow to provide insulation and buoyancy. Polar bears can go to sleep on the surface of the ocean. And they have been shown to swim 60 miles. And the polar bears have not gone extinct. They're not endangered. In fact, they're increasing in numbers to the point where they're now considered a pest animal again. Well, the polar bear thing didn't work so well. They've decided on a new mascot, the Aardvark. Researchers warn that the Aardvark will die from climate change. And to show you just how completely devoid of any real science the debate is, article out of the Daily Mail, okay, and they're quoting a Professor Hansen at Columbia University, that cutting emissions isn't enough. We must remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as soon as possible to avoid extreme climate change. Now, anybody understand what's wrong with that statement? Let's not always see the same hands, okay? If you remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, plant life starts to die. Carbon dioxide is not a toxic pollutant as declared by the Environmental Protection Agency. It is an indispensable part of the cycle of life here on Earth. Commercial greenhouses actually artificially increase the amount of carbon dioxide in their interior air because it makes the plants grow faster and produce more product. But this idea that we're going to remove all the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it would be the end of life. California has extended their cap and trade legislation despite absolutely no proof it helps prevent climate change. Do you remember 25 years ago, the big scary thing was the ozone hole? Oh, there's a hole in the ozone over Antarctica. It's going to be the end of the world. You have to stop using your little spray cans and get the more expensive safe chemical or the pump thing. We're all still here. And it turns out the ozone hole has always been there. It wasn't new. I mean, global warming, global cooling, the China syndrome, well, we got that in Fukushima. Killer bees, Y2K. It's an endless series of fear campaigns with which to milk you of your money and your freedom. Apparently, the Environmental Protection Agency is going to demonstrate how they're protecting the environment by allowing the dumping of fracking wastewater directly into the Gulf of Mexico, as if those people living around the Gulf weren't already suffering from the Gulf oil disaster and all that corrects it. So they're just going to be taking all this fracking wastewater, which is toxic, carcinogenic, even radioactive, and they're just going to dump it in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, there's a problem with that. It doesn't stay in the Gulf of Mexico. And we've already seen, when the Gulf oil disaster happened, water evaporates from the Gulf of Mexico. It flows north over the middle of the United States of America. It comes down as rain. And people were noticing as it was raining that the puddles of water had that little rainbow oil sheen on it. So these fracking chemicals are going to wind up being dumped all over the heartland of the United States of America. Now, legal marijuana sales in the United States totaled $6.7 billion in 2016. Sounds like a good business to be getting on into. But, of course, Jeff Sessions is at war with marijuana because it's cutting into the profits of the alcohol and tobacco companies. A little bit of good news, though. Senate committee has now approved medical marijuana for veterans for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, and it is known to work. And I'm sure they had a lot of lobbyists from the pharmaceutical corporation saying, no, you make them buy our medications here. But apparently Sessions is now planning to seize the assets of the legal cannabis companies and bust more people. And in addition, instead of sharing the proceeds from this civil forfeiture at the federal level with state and local administrations, the Department of Justice is going to keep it all themselves in order to fund more compliance actions against the marijuana industry. It's like the days of prohibition. All right, we're coming up here on the commercial break here, and we'll be back with more news leading up to the top of the hour. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, a little while ago, we were talking about this satellite called MAYAC, which was actually a crowd-funded operation, was launched as a CubeSat aboard a Soyuz 2, and it's carrying this giant mylar sun reflector, which is going to test the possibility of using solar sail technology to deorbit space junk, which is getting to be a growing problem. And it was successfully launched, and the telemetry indicated that the reflector has deployed, but amateur astronomers don't seem able to find it. And the developers of the satellite are getting ready to release an iPhone and Android app to allow you to track the unit. I haven't seen a two-line element set for it just yet for existing software. But it occurs to me, I don't know exactly what this reflector looks like. But if it's mylar and it's behaving like a mirror, there are two issues. If it's a round sphere like the old Echo, yes, everybody should be able to see it. But if it's, for example, a tetrahedron, the reality is when you're out there in space, most of what surrounds you is black, and you're not going to get much of a reflection off of that. And if its intention is to reflect sunlight, the reflection from one of those mylar flat panels is only going to fall on a very, very tiny portion of Earth below. So that may be what is going on with this thing, depending upon its orientation. And of course, if one of those flat mylar mirrors is looking straight down, it's not going to be all that bright from the illumination it receives from the Earth, especially if people are trying to see it from the dark side of the Terminator. You know, just early morning before sunrise or evening just after sunset. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. They're trying to censor people from RBN, from you and your website, or an RBN's total thing, trying to link into you and everything. What had happened, the beginning of the show, I tried, following www.republicbroadcastingwork.org, and I got this error message, and it wouldn't even let me close my computer out or anything. So I called the number that it said. Of course, you couldn't talk to anybody that spoke English. And it was a Microsoft, and I guess there was a subgroup of people, and they tried to scam, trying to not let me get on RBN. So you're
okay.
RBN,
Hang on. It okay. So you tried to go to Republic Broadcasting, and you got this. You're blocked, and they gave you a phone number to call.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a scam. And I don't know why you're getting that scamware at the Republic Broadcasting website. Obviously, they're going to have to check for malware, but that's a very common online scam where, in fact, it may not even be Republic Broadcasting. It could easily be your browser has a hijacker on it. Where they do that pop-up and say, you're infected, you've got this, you've got that, and then they give you a phone number to call, and they say, we can repair it from here, and then they get your credit card information. So, yeah, you need to check your browser for a hijacker, and I'm sure that our techs here at RBN will be taking a close look at our web server as well. We got to take a break for station identification. We are going to be back here with Charlie Robinson after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And before we get to our telephone guest here, I'm looking at tracking information on that satellite Mayak. And yes, it is a tetrahedron with flat surfaces, and that's going to explain why, unless you're at the exact right position, you're not going to get a bounced sunbeam or anything else on. And as a matter of fact, it is passing right over Hawaii as we speak. In fact, it's right over the island of Kauai, that-a-way. So we'll be keeping an eye on that in the future. Now, joining us on the air right now is Charlie Robinson. He's an author. He's got a book out called The Octopus of Global Control. And Charlie, first of all, let me apologize for missing you yesterday. We were dealing with all kinds of technical issues, and we couldn't get to you. So thank you for being patient with us and agreeing to be with us today. Welcome to our show.
Problem at all. Thank you very much. No problem at all. Glad to be with you.
Okay, so tell us about the book, what it's about.
So the book came about 10 years ago. I was going on a scuba diving trip to Thailand. A friend of mine said, hey, you should take this book and read this on your trip. And it was Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Mm-hmm. So in between my dives, I would go up, get dried off, reading this book. Couldn't put it down. It just seemed to kind of make a whole lot of sense to me. At the time, I was working in Las Vegas in the real estate industry, and that was, sort of a hotbed of nonsense and fraud and all sorts of shady mortgage dealings. So in my own life, I was seeing the fraud firsthand. I'm reading John Perkins' book. I'm seeing about how this fraud is used to control countries through debt and things like that, and it all started to make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's really where it started. But, like a lot of people, I think what woke me up to the realities of, what's really happening in this world was 9/11 in general and Building 7 in particular. I mean, I just couldn't wrap my head around how that could have happened any other way than a controlled demolition. So if that is the way it was brought down, and I think most reasonable people understand that, then we've got some problems. We've got some people that doesn't happen in an afternoon. That is something that takes a long time to plan. So I started to get into this whole world based on that. And I was just trying to figure out, what's going on. And as you and your listeners probably know, you kind of have to be careful who you talk to about your sort of non-traditional beliefs, because some of your friends are, they'll roll their eyes, or they'll say, you know what, I don't want to hear this. You're bringing me down, or you sound like a lunatic or whatever. But one of the people in my life that was willing to listen and had an open mind about things like this was actually my mother. So I would tell her about things I would kind of come across, and we'd talk about it. And one day she said, well, that's great. You've got all this is really interesting. Now what? What are you going to do with it? And I really didn't have an answer. Oh my God, I hadn't planned on doing anything with it. So at that point, I thought, well, I probably can put this together in the form of a book, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that. And what I decided on was to take the concept of the control of our world by, evil people that are running the show in high-ranking positions in government and corporations and things like that. I wanted to figure out how they were doing it, what they were doing, and then I wanted to go dig in and find quotes. I wanted to find information from people that were involved in these operations firsthand. I wanted to hear what they were saying. So it led me to digging into quotes about Council on Foreign Relations and Bilderberger and all of these really fascinating topics, and came down to writing it out. the 8 legs, the 8 legs of the octopus: military control, governmental control, covert control, physical control, financial control, obviously. Probably the one day-to-day is media control that we're all aware of, spiritual control, and scientific control. And they all have different goals, but the common thread is that we are not supposed to know exactly what the plan is, and it's interesting for us to sort of put that together. So that's what I set about to do.
Well,
a big undertaking.
I'm looking through the book here right now, and I mean, the index kind of just spells it on out. And this is now available for sale, right?
It's available for sale on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other ebook public marketplaces as well, yes.
Okay, well, I'm looking through the index, and some of the topics you have is under military control, you have the war on war, and goose-stepping to a one-world government, registering and banning firearms before the slaughter. And that one certainly is true, because we know in the 20th century, every single genocide was preceded by a gun ban on that targeted population. And you do seem to have covered a lot of topics. Under governmental control, you have Elections Incorporated, which I presume is about the massive election fraud we're dealing with.
Yes. Although it could be any election fraud, because let's be honest, it's happening in many countries.
Oh, yeah, it's global. It's absolutely global here. And if you believe the corporate media, it's all being done by Russia here. I love this one chapter.
Oh, of course, yeah, I forgot.
I love this chapter heading, Does This Tinfoil Hat Make Me Look Crazy? And that's, of course, under covert control.
Yeah.
But it's a huge engulfing situation. Can you give us some of the highlights of what you found, stuff that maybe is not as well known to the public as other issues?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things I had to get straight before I started this was these topics are really serious. It's a big deal. They're very important, but they can be draining and overwhelming, and you can really bum people out if you're just so doom and gloom. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to drag my twisted sense of humor into this, not because I don't think that these topics are important, but because I just think it eases people into it. It maybe keeps them hanging on a little bit longer to get the gist of what the problem is without, overwhelming them with so much negativity. I think Jon Stewart did that really well with Daily Show. People sort of understood he was goofing on things, but he could get to they could figure out the point.
George Carlin did the same thing, and you have to, because otherwise,
exactly.
As you say, it does become overwhelming, the seriousness of what is under discussion.
Yeah, and one thing that I would find, so when I'm digging into these different topics, I couldn't really believe that sometimes these people were saying these things on the record. They were saying insane things. The video, I think a lot of people have probably seen the interview on 60 Minutes between Lesley Stahl and Madeleine Albright. Lesley Stahl asked a very normal question. We've heard 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, is the price worth it? So all Madeleine Albright had to say was, no, price is not worth it. But that's not what she said, because she's a psychopath. She says, I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Yeah, as long as it's other people's children.
Exactly. When you are acknowledging that 500,000 dead Iraqi children is okay, you are a crazy person. And the more I've sort of dug into that, I realized, Madeleine Albright isn't alone. There are a lot of people in positions of power that are psychopaths. But really what I figured out was that that's by design. It's no accident. It's not, there's nothing about being a Boy Scout troop leader that turns you into a pedophile. It's not that. It's the other way around. Pedophiles go where the hunting's good, with psychopaths, they go into places where they can be rewarded for their psychopathy, which is banking, government, the media. So they have all these needs that need to be met. And so you start to wonder if it's really possible that all these people are just crazy, or if maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just reading this wrong. Well, You start to see the lineups at these Bohemian Grove events, and you realize, no, it's not me. This is a group of crazy people plotting to rule the world. And when you say that to someone, they roll their eyes. But then, the more that you see this over and over again, it's really true. So I think I was sort of astounded by that. But maybe more important than that is that this is not new. This is something that has been going on for a long, long time. I wanted to read this real quick. This is from a guy named John Francis Hyland. He was the mayor of New York City, and he wrote this. This says, with regard to the term the octopus, but beyond that, the real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy legs over our city, states, and nation. To depart from mere generalizations, let me say that the head of the octopus are the Rockefeller, Standard Oil interests, and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers. This little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make catspaws of party leaders, use leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers, Rockefeller, Standard Oil interests, control the majority of the newspapers and magazines in the country. They use the columns of these papers to club into submission or drive out of office officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful, corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. It operates under cover of a self-created screen and seizes our executive officers, legislative bodies, schools, courts, newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection. That was written in 1922.
Yes.
100 years. It's haven't gotten any better. So it's always been this way. I think.
Do you remember Danny Casolaro?
I do. Yes, I do. You know what? I found out about him much later and found the octopus name there. That's a fascinating one.
It really is, and of course, back there, again, he was supposedly a suicide by slashing both of his wrists multiple times, which, if you understand where the tendons for the hand go, you understand that was absolutely impossible. But it was declared a suicide, and back then, anybody said, oh, how could you possibly question the official decision of suicide? And here we are all these years later, and now, the running joke is every time they say somebody committed suicide, the first thing you ask is, I wonder what they knew about the Clintons.
No kidding. Well, I told my mom when I was discussing this, I said, hey, you want to see this? This guy named Danny Casolaro wrote a book called The Octopus. He's 44 years old, and then he wound up dead in a suicide. And she looks at me because I'm 44. She says, good Lord. I said, I'm not going to kill myself. I ought to put that out there in public in case anyone thinks otherwise, although I don't really think that I'm on to anything that is too... that isn't, I think Danny Casolaro had quite a bit to worry about, and he made the mistake of perhaps calling his shot before he did it, which...
That's always a mistake. That's always a mistake to say, Dorothy Kilgallen made the same mistake back at the Kennedy assassination. She was going around saying, I'm going to blow this case wide open, and the next thing you know, she is dead under questionable circumstances, and then 3 days later, her roommate was killed.
Yeah. If you're going to do that, do it.
Yes.
Don't talk about it. Just put it out there.
Yeah.
And then no sense trying to defuse the bomb after it's already gone off.
That didn't apply to Seth Rich, unfortunately.
No, I know. And that is, I just see these things and I wonder, I shake my head and I think, how come everyone else can't see these? This is so obvious, but it's a process. I think, I understand I went through the process. I'd like to say on the morning of September 11th, I had it all figured out. I really didn't. It took years after that before it really started to make sense to me. So I understand that some people are in different paths. They're not quite to that point, but things sort of build up and add up. I mean, how many suicides can you have where you're shot yourself in the chest and then thrown yourself into a river? I mean, before somebody says, this is not...
Or killed or zippered yourself into a bag and then killed yourself, or shot yourself in the back of the head twice, and it's really ridiculous stuff here. And of course, I've been involved in this going all the way back to 1994, and the murder of Vince Foster. But the reality is more and more people are starting to realize there is something fundamentally wrong with the official story coming from the government and the corporate media. And it's been a long, slow process, but you could plot the awakening American people as a curve that is exponential in nature. And unlike Al Gore's global warming chart, this one isn't fake. There really is a rapidly upward sweep. And because of it, we're seeing the corporate media is in economic trouble. Their viewers and readers are abandoning them. So are their advertisers, especially since it came on out that a lot of these corporate media outlets are now rigging and faking their readership numbers and website clicks to try and remain legitimate. But we're on this path to where pretty much every American understands something has gone wrong with this country. They may not know it in the detail that you and I do. Obviously, this book would be a good primer for people who are just now waking up and realizing that something has gone horribly wrong with this country here. And
I agree. I think that, the mainstream media is dead and they have nobody to blame but themselves.
I agree.
They brought this all on. They just put themselves in a position to be ridiculed. And it used to be that you were a conspiracy theorist and obviously a tinfoil hat wearing lunatic if you thought these things. Well, I got news for you. A lot of the things that the tinfoil hat wearing crowd believes are true.
Yes.
And you don't, and if you go back, you look into the CIA's, handbook for how they're going to deal with conspiracy theorists, they lay it all out. But don't take my word for it that this was concocted by them. It's in their own writing. They list, this is how you approach it. Call them conspiracy. You marginalize them this way. You're dismissive. And then, of course, that works as long as you have control of the media. If you start to lose control of the media, then there are the opportunities for more voices to come in and give a different opinion on this. The mainstream media had that locked down for the past 30, 40 years. But now with the internet, with shows like yours, people are able to speak amongst each other to people they would never reach out, they would never normally interact with, and people are starting to put it together. It might be a slow process, but I feel like we're definitely going in the right direction for it.
No, there's no question about that. The phrase conspiracy theorist was actually created following the John F. Kennedy assassination in order to dismiss and marginalize those who were pointing out the obvious flaws in the official story, such as the magic bullet theory, and to dismiss those people who said that Oswald was actually at street level when John F. Kennedy was shot in the throat, and then, of course, later on a photograph surfaced confirming that. And it took about 30 years to reach a point where half of the American public understood the Warren Report was a fiction and a cover-up. Today, the lifespan of a government and corporate media lie can be clocked with an egg timer. And if there's one thing we can point to as a victory for the independent media, it is that we have taken away from them their ability to lie with impunity to the American people or the people of the world. And we have all these recent examples like Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's gas, and everything that the government and the corporate media are trying to do to regain control is only accelerating that loss of trust.
Yeah, and I quote the great Jim Marrs, not a conspiracy theory if you can prove it. So I feel like the government at this point, they're pushing these nonsensical stories. They don't even have the decency to change the format. I mean, they're giving us the same thing for Syria that they sold us on Iraq. Like, how dare you? But I think it goes to show how little respect and how much contempt they have for the public, because they don't even really care, it seems, if you figure out that it's a big lie. Assad is gassing his own team like Saddam was. Explain to me how this would make any sense for him to be doing this. Well, because we have a source. Oh, okay, wonderful. You have a source. I mean, so they can say whatever they want, and I suppose it is up to us to challenge them on, and make them show us the proof. It seems like they have never felt that they need to show us the proof. It's just we've got it taken care of. You guys go back to bed. The grown-ups will handle this.
But that all changed. That all changed after Saddam's nuclear weapons, and all of a sudden everybody said, from now on, the burden of proof is on you. Prior to that, the government's attitude was, if you think we're lying, go ahead and prove we're lying. And then we proved they were lying with Saddam's nukes, and now the burden of proof is on them. Okay, Charlie, we're going to have to take a break for commercials here. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with author Charlie Robinson. He's got a new book out, The Octopus of Global Control, and it's covering just a wide range of topics and subjects, all on that issue of how we are being controlled by government, by the media, being penned on in, and it's a good primer for people who are just now waking up. They just took the red pill, or whatever metaphor you want to use, and they're realizing something is not right. I want to know what's really been going on, and this is a good resource here. So, Charlie, we were talking about how the people of America are waking up, and again, this is a very strong parallel to what we saw going on in the former Soviet Union just before that government collapsed as well, where the Soviet citizens, aware that the government had lied to them about Chernobyl, all of a sudden said, I wonder what else we've been lied to about, and they started sharing information over fax machines. They didn't have computers and an internet back then. And that was enough to destroy the credibility in the central government, and it came crashing down. And what's really important when you're dealing with somebody who's resistant to this idea that government lies to you is they've been brainwashed into thinking that government is usually truthful, and if there's somebody who's lying or caught lying like a Richard Nixon, that it's an anomaly, and that is simply not true. And over at my website, I have an article up in that permanent collection at the top, Of the Liars, By the Liars, and For the Liars, and it is basically an historical look back at all the rulers who have lied to their people to start wars, all the frauds that have been perpetrated by people in positions of authority like the church, and you come to understand after a while that when you discover the U.S. government is lying about Saddam's nuclear weapons, it's not a unique, isolated incident. It is, in fact, business as usual.
Standard operating procedure. And if I quote 500 different people in this book, but if I had to pick the number one quote, probably the most important 3 sentences that people that are maybe starting to wake up, and you just have to look at the Project for the New American Century. This is maybe one of the most important quotes in the last 100 years. Further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
Holy crap, they just spelled it out. This is what they wanted. No accident that it happened a year later.
No, not at all.
That was scheduled. That's the way it goes. So you start to think, well, all right, like if I'm gonna really understand this, if I'm really gonna to dig into this, then I have to accept some facts, and that is that maybe my government isn't looking out for me. How's that for a possibility? I think it's probably true. There's a great quote I put in here. It says, "Once a government resorts to terror against its own population to get what it wants, it must keep using terror against its own population. The government that terrorizes its own people can never stop. If such a government ever lets the fear subside and rational thought return to the populace, that government is finished." That was by the great Michael Rivero.
I thought it sounded vaguely familiar.
Yeah, it's true. They're in a position now where they're past the point of no return. They can never admit to this. They just have to keep going. It is... all they can do is try and snuff out people that are going to talk about things like this, but that will only delay the inevitable. And I think it's the people are tired of it. Of course, they're tired of it. But,
well, more than that, the terror is burning out. People are so burned out on it all. Every new false flag, the reaction tends to be more and more about, okay, it's another one. So if they're not able to get traction with more terror, then we are already calming down, and rational thought is returning to the population even as we speak.
Yeah, the only problem with that is that once they realize that the terror is, everyone's sort of getting this new normal and sort of, not as scared by the terror, they have to ramp it up.
Yes.
So my fear is that they're going to, that in an effort to stay one step ahead of everybody, they're going to do something big. And, I can't predict that, and I don't know what's going to happen. But I do know that they seem to be getting nervous about avenues that usurp their power. So you're seeing like cryptocurrency starting to become very popular, and people are, of course, the Federal Reserve, the federal banks are thinking that is not okay with them.
No, that's not okay with them. Okay, we have to take another break for commercials. It's kind of spaced out unevenly here. We'll be gone about 4 minutes, and then we'll be back with Charlie Robinson and the Octopus of Global Control. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Charlie Robinson. He's got a new book out, The Octopus of Global Control. And in the spirit of editorial honesty, there are a couple of areas in the book I don't agree with, in particular review about the Apollo moon landings, and that's coming from the fact that I actually did work on Apollo 12 post-mission. And something that you need to understand is, as part of its effort to discredit the independent media, the government likes to plant junk out there to make us look like we are a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing kooks. And the fake Apollo landings are one, chemtrails is another, HAARP is another, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. But overall, the book is very comprehensive and does cover a lot of ground. It covers Agenda 2030. It covers the depopulation agenda. And I do like how you go into detail on 9/11 about talking about pulling building number 7. And so, again, could you pick another highlight from the book that you'd like to share with our readers, our listeners, rather?
Well, sure. You mentioned a little bit about the depopulation or the Agenda 2030. This is something that sounds crazy, but is very serious, and it's something that I think we need to be aware of. If you've ever heard of the Georgia Guidestones, you can think of the Georgia Guidestones like the 10 Commandments plus Stonehenge plus Waffle House. They are kind of weird. They are talking about keeping population at a very, 500 million. Nobody is really sure who paid for them, but it's in Atlanta. Ted Turner's name kind of comes up. There is a very unusual belief system from a lot of the people, not everybody, a lot of people that are running the show, and that is the depopulation agenda. They want to they want to thin the herd. They want to get rid of the bad stock. It never occurs to them that, since they're considering murdering billions of people, that perhaps they're the bad stock. That probably never crosses their mind. But you've got the hypocritical Ted Turner, father of 5, saying that, we need to get rid of all these people. And you have, Henry Kissinger saying that we should reduce the population by 50%, which I'd suggest let's start by cutting him in half. So,
well, in Kissinger's view, Kissinger's view, he wanted to depopulate all those third world nations so they couldn't resist when the U.S. came on in and exploited their natural resources. By the way, you know about the total solar eclipse on August 21st? Its path of totality goes over the Georgia Guidestones, and everybody's out there trying to interpret some grand spiritual significance to this.
Oh, my God, they'll be howling at the moon for sure.
Yes.
Stay away from that. Well, yeah, I think that but in conjunction with the sort of depopulation agenda, sort of the softer side of that, but maybe even more important, is the dumbing down of society. And it's happening physically through food. We're getting garbage food, and we are also seeing it in the other direction through the educational system.
Yes.
The Common Core is, it sounds make-believe. It sounds hilarious when you read, their ideas and the things that they put forward. You can find the math questions that if you answered this, it was, 3 times 4. If you showed the work and came out with the answer of 11, you got credit because you showed the work. Your answer was wrong, but you got credit. If you just said 3 times 4 equals 12, you'd get that wrong. And that sounds like somebody's, pulling your leg, but it's really the way they're operating. It's very, very bizarre. It is an intentional dumbing down through schools to make sure that nobody's smart. They breed out the critical thought gene so that you're no longer questioning what's going on. And it's basically a race to see if we can get this all figured out before they've got it so dumbed down that we don't even care anymore.
Well, you're absolutely right about that, and I've seen a lot of the Common Core curriculum. Claire and I used to have a neighbor who was involved with the implementation of Common Core right here in Hawaii, and she shared a lot of information with us, and frankly, I was appalled at what Common Core was about, and it was mostly about indoctrination, and you're absolutely right. It was designed to not teach students how to think, how to analyze, how to self-direct, how to reason, but simply to memorize and repeat by rote what they were told. It was basically indoctrinating them into a culture of unquestioning obedience, and that is part of the dumbing down process, and we are seeing it all over the country right now. And it's amazing. Parents are unable to fight back. In fact, when Common Core was first released, the schools were literally ordered that the parents not be shown any of these curriculum materials. Out of a concern that the parents were going to say, this stuff is just absolute nonsense. And as far as the math part of Common Core, it almost reminds me of that old Tom Lehrer song, The New Math, which you can go on out and find on YouTube. And again, the same thing. It's more important to show the work than to actually get the right answer.
It's crazy. If you try to pull that in your day-to-day job, you'll be fired. The world doesn't work like that. You have to get the answer correct, and it's weird that it's weird that that's what they're into. But see, this Bill Gates has backed that, and the Ford Foundation did a lot of the bankrolling, and the Rockefeller Foundation did a lot of the bankrolling of the education early on. And I guess it's just a weird thing when you've made enough money, you don't know what to do. You decide, well, I guess I'll just sort of go to work on the educational system, and maybe I'll create a nation of workers, not thinkers.
Well, that goes all the way back to Andrew Carnegie. I mean, Andrew Carnegie and the Carnegie Foundation, he spent a huge amount of his wealth to try and change education in this country. It was his belief that the ultra-rich were actually a separate and distinct species of human being from the poor, and he felt education should only teach the poor people just enough skills to do their jobs and fill out the paperwork and not to question and not to think. And every subsequent reform of education since then has followed that same model. Because the ruling class is very, very scared of a population that can think and reason, because it makes it easy for us to see through the lies. And obviously the good example, as you yourself mentioned, Assad is gassing his own people at Idlib. Really? Why would he do something that stupid? And obviously whoever put that propaganda out there was unprepared for a population that was actually going to think this through and realize it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I have a chapter that's called "The Most Interesting Man in the World." No, it's not it's not a beer commercial. It is Obama's former czar, John P. Holdren. Are you familiar with this lunatic?
Oh, yes.
He wrote a book called Ecoscience in 1977, and I'm not kidding when I say this is a couple of the points that he proposed in his book. Women could be forced to abort their pregnancies whether they wanted to or not. Population at large could be sterilized by infertility drugs intentionally put into the nation's drinking water or in food. Single mothers and teen mothers should have their babies seized from them against their will and given away to other couples to raise. And people who are quote, contribute to social deterioration can be required by law to have abortions or be sterilized. I mean, it's insanity. And this guy was like the science czar for Obama. So if you're putting these people with this mindset in positions of power, you can't act surprised when you get really weird results. And that's part of what we're seeing.
Well, there was a big eugenics movement in the United States back in the 1930s that wanted to take criminals and sterilize them, especially prostitutes. And Margaret Sanger was involved in all of this, but she was targeting specifically the thinning out of the black population. And what's really amazing, most people don't understand this, Adolf Hitler's race hygiene program was modeled after the American eugenics campaign of the 1930s. And so obviously after World War II was over, the American eugenics movement basically vanished from sight because of the obvious associations to Nazi thinking. Now it's starting to resurface. And there's always going to be a group of people who think that the planet would be so much better off without so many human beings on it, as long as it's other human beings who are dying or going without children. You're talking about putting sterilizing drugs in the food. Are you aware of what was called the Epicyte gene?
No.
Okay. This was a genetically modified corn that was developed under a U.S. Department of Agriculture grant. And people who eat this corn, it causes their body to treat human sperm as an infection and develop antibodies to kill it. So anybody who eats this corn becomes infertile and unable to reproduce. And it was acquired later by Monsanto. And here's the scary part. If this gene has broken into the wild, there could be some serious problems. And there has been a dramatic decline in birth rates in the United States since that corn was developed, mostly among the Hispanics, who are the highest per capita consumers of corn in our population.
Wow, what a surprise. I have a quote in the book from Hillary Clinton going on and on about her love and appreciation for Margaret Sanger, just so you know. So that gives you an idea of what Hillary Clinton was sort of modeling her behavior after, the lady that wanted everybody to be sterilized and have all babies. The greatest thing a person can do is to take a baby's life or something like that, Margaret Sanger says. Total lunacy. We have this amazing science. We have the ability to do all kinds of amazing, great things. We use it for that, and to make corn that turns people sterile. Like, what's the matter with us? What is going on here?
Well, you were talking about Henry Kissinger wanting to reduce the human population. That actually goes back to an official White House study. National Security Study Memorandum 200 was done under the Nixon administration, basically saying that population growth in the third world was a threat to U.S. economic interests around the globe. And it recommended covert programs of sterilization using vaccines, something that Bill Gates is very much on board with today. And Nixon actually adopted it as U.S. policy. And when Gerald Ford took on over following Nixon's resignation, he was rather shocked to find out that the World Health Organization was traveling around these third world countries offering free typhus vaccinations that were actually covert sterilization shots.
Yeah, and we're seeing it in India with the Gavi, with Bill Gates's foundation. You've got 47,000 children that have polio. Of course, they changed the name so that it doesn't really look the same way as traditional polio, but it's the same symptoms, and they're just taking expired and old vaccines, shipping them over to third world countries and selling them like they're brand new.
Well, that's part of the problem. The other problem is what's called a reduced pathogen vaccine, where they'll take the actual infective agent and they'll weaken it, and they'll put it in a vaccine, figuring that the weakened pathogen will trigger the immune response, making you immune to the disease. But we have seen, and that this includes the oral polio vaccine, that once it is administered, the weakened pathogen actually reverts to full potency. And so these vaccines are not protecting these kids from polio, it's actually giving them polio. We've seen the same thing with the MMR vaccine as well. But it's all big money. Yeah. And remember, back in 2011, the Supreme Court ruled you cannot sue a vaccine maker for any damage done to your child by a vaccine.
Yeah, nothing screams innocent like having a full protection clause to not get sued. And also, if you look at sort of the way if you want to make some real money, get in the vaccine industry, because in America, you cannot be sued. You do not have to advertise. It's required, and for a lot of, it's going to be required in California for children to start school. There's absolutely no downside because nobody can do anything to. But they're selling it. They're selling it in a similar way that they did with cigarettes back in the 40s, which sounds crazy because you'd say, hey, there were ads that said, 4 out of 5 doctors prefer Camels. And you go, that didn't exist. That's nuts. No. You can find it, and you can look at it, and you go, wow, that seems insane. Well, guess what? We're going to get to a point where 30 years later, we're going to be looking back on this and trying to explain why it was we were okay with the vaccines and why we didn't question them. I mean, the companies that are making the vaccines do not necessarily have a pristine reputation. I mean, it's worth digging into it. And there's a lot of nonsense there, in part because there's just so much money. So,
yes.
People want to say, well, I don't know if you can tie the vaccines to autism. Look, it's got to be acknowledged as being at least, at bare minimum, a contributing factor. There are plenty of other things that could cause this, but this is a real problem. And people that call that out are made to feel like they're crazy people. And that's not okay. The Disneyland vaccine outbreak, to me, was very telling, because I was living in California at the time and I was watching it. They said, of the people that got it, 13% of them were unvaccinated. Okay, well then that means that the other half was vaccinated and they got it. So you're saying that 87 other kids got it and they had the vaccine. Doesn't look like the vaccine's working, does it? How is it everyone else's fault?
Well, even worse, the vaccine can cause the illness, and kids who have been vaccinated can actually pass the illness itself on to people around them as well through sweat and the rest of it. But it is it's patent medicine. It's this age's version of the traveling Wild West medicine show and patent medicines. And it is being sold with, the corrupt politicians saying, yes, it's going to be mandatory. And we're hearing more and more where these legislatures that are mandating these vaccines for the general population are exempting themselves, because they know what's really going on here. It's like you go over to Monsanto, to their company cafeteria. They don't serve GMO food there. They know better. They absolutely do know better.
I've got to think that people that work at Monsanto, there's got to be some decent human beings there, right? There's got to be some. Can't they? Can't they just stand up one day and say, "This is not right"?
Well, some of them have. Some of them have, but the process of the vaccines and everything is broken into so many small parts. Most people don't see the totality, and a lot of people they're literally indoctrinated with this image that the medical industrial complex is all about healing and care, and doctors are always good. And the reaction when I talk to medical professionals about the problems with vaccine is, "How dare you? How dare you question our honor and integrity?" Meanwhile, in New Jersey, they just busted a doctor who was running an illegal drug operation that would make, Walter White blush in terms of how much illegal drugs he flooded onto the street here. So, people do need to be a little bit more skeptical about this. It's all about generating money. It's all about pushing product over and over and over again. And it's like almost like with religion. Look how long it took for the clerical pedophile scandal to break into view, because the attitude was, you can't question the church. You can't say bad things about the church. The church is holy. It's the house of God. You can't say bad things about it. Yeah, well, let's talk about all these little kitties walking around bow-legged right now. Right. We're going to have to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're finishing up with Charlie Robinson, author of The Octopus of Global Control here. And before we run out of time, Charlie, do you have a website?
No. I'm selling the book on Amazon and the other online bookstores, but no website.
Okay, so people can just go to Amazon.com and just search for The Octopus of Global Control, and they will find it.
They can find it, and also you can read the first 40 pages or so. So take a look at it, check it out. If it's something you like, if it's right up your alley, buy it. If not, it's still fun to talk about that. Some of the topics we got into, or I got into in this book, some of them are, it's a bit, gloomy for the future. But, I did not want to leave it on a negative note, because I think we have a lot of really great things in our future, but there is one option that I think that we all forget we have, and I think it's really important to remember, and that is we do not have to comply with everything that we are told to do. There are so many direct orders out there that we do not need to follow. We need to sort of take that back and say, you know what, this is not okay with me. Yeah, but there's a law. I don't care. This is not okay. You cannot force these kids to get vaccines before you start them in school. It's not all right. And so if it's just one person not complying, maybe you have a problem. But as the numbers start to add up, that is one aspect of this that the people in control cannot handle. We outnumber them 1,000 to 1, and we need to remember that. And if there's something that we are being forced to do that does not resonate with us, that we know internally that this is just not right, we have to remember we have the ability to just not do it.
I would like to remind everybody of two things. First of all, if the government is not in full compliance with the Constitution and its limitations, then it is no longer the legal, legitimate government of this land. And I'd also like to remind everybody about a very early U.S. Supreme Court decision, Marbury versus Madison, which declared that any laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. So the government can pass a law, and you are not bound to comply with it if it violates the Constitution, and you don't need some court to review it and decide for you. It is left up to the American people to look at a law and say, does this in fact comply with the restrictions on government placed there by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? We got about 1 minute left. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, there's a funny quote from Paul Craig Roberts, who was the Assistant Secretary of Treasury under Reagan. He says, "For reporting a scientific finding, I was called a conspiracy theorist. Only in America is scientific analysis seen as conspiracy theory and government lies as truth."
That's a good quote. That's absolutely a
good
quote.
Yeah. Well, the first step is for us to just be aware of what's going on. I think obviously you are. Your listeners, I'm sure, are. Wake some people up, however you think is the best way to do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us today, Charlie. There's the music. It's time for us to head on out of here and make way for John Stadmiller, who's following on, so stay tuned for his program. Please take what you learn here on this show, on the website, share it with everybody that you know. We need to keep pushing back against this tsunami of misinformation being poured on us right now. By the way, Gerald Salente is going to be John Stadmiller's guest, so please stay tuned. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.